Hello, this is John English with the Smart Questions Club on UtahPoliticoHub.com, and my special guest today is Jonathan Johnson, candidate for governor. How are you doing?
I'm well, John. Thanks for having me on.
Let's start off with a little bit of a biography on you. You're best known for being the former CEO of Overstock.com. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and what made you interested in seeking public office.
So a little bit about me. My wife, Courtney, and I have been married for over 27 years. We have 5 children, boys, ages 12 to 23. I'm a BYU undergrad and BYU law school grad. I practiced law for a number of years before going into business. I've been with Overstock for a little bit over 13 years, currently the chairman of the board there. 2 or 3 years ago, I read a book called Leadocracy by a fellow named Jeff Smart. And the concept of the book is that the quality of leaders that we hire or elect determines the quality of government that we get. And it's really a call to action to folks that aren't career politicians, that have been successful outside the political arena, to do a stint of public service. And that got me interested, and one thing led to another, and now I'm running for governor.
Okay. What would your path to victory be in defeating an incumbent?
Well, that's a fair question. I certainly intend to go through the caucus convention system, and am considering gathering signatures as well. But I think spending time with the delegates, learning what's important to Utah, and explaining areas where Governor Herbert and I differ are important, and that's what I've been doing for the last many months.
Okay. Let's go through some issues. Tell me about your stance on education regarding No Child Left Behind and Common Core.
Okay. I'm not a fan of Common Core. I believe that the closer that we make decisions to the individual and the family, the better. And so taking a standard developed by a national group and pushed out by a national group and funded by No Child Left Behind is not close to I think I know Governor Herbert was a big supporter of it. My concern, one of my concerns with that bill is that it gives full veto rights over state education. To me, that's the opposite of federalism. That's letting the federal government dig into the business of state education.
Okay. We had some buffer problems there at the beginning. Can you state that first part again?
Sure. I'm not a fan of Common Core. I would like to see individual school districts determine what tests and standards they use, rather than being having standards that are national groups and tied to funds from the federal government.
Okay. We are having a snowstorm right now, so that might be affecting our bandwidth here. Let me go to some other issues. Nationally, there's still a lot of Republicans in the race. Which presidential candidates are you leaning more toward?
Well, that's a great question. I've met several of them. I think the Republicans have an embarrassment of riches right now, and maybe an embarrassment of a few embarrassments as well. I like Marco Rubio. I like Carly Fiorina. There are aspects of Ted Cruz I really like. But, you know, I think the Republicans are going to be able to field a ticket that can take back the White House.
Okay. From a statewide office, who would be some people you would be considering for lieutenant governor?
Well, it's probably too early to talk about that. You know, I'd like to find someone that complements my strengths, rounds out maybe some flat sides that I have. Someone who has experience working with the legislature. We're looking at a lot of people right now, but I think it's too early to put names out in public.
Okay. Governor Herbert made news recently by being the only Republican governor to refuse to accept Syrian refugees. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think he made news by being the only Republican governor not willing to refuse to accept refugees. I came out with a statement on that, and I understand the plight of refugees, and I think I understand it on a fairly personal level. When I was a kid, my aunt and uncle went down to Camp Pendleton in Southern California and adopted 3 Vietnamese orphans. And so my cousins Annie, Amy, and David Tron are and were Vietnamese refugees. And I've seen how American generosity has blessed and changed their lives. And I've seen how they have and continue to contribute to make America great. So I understand the need to have, for America to have a big heart and reach out to refugees. But that said, I'm very concerned that there are ISIS radicals and terrorists coming in under the guise of refugee status. And until we can know that that's not happening, particularly for military-age males, single males that are coming in as refugees, I'm opposed to having more refugees come into the state right now.
Okay. Let me ask you about the lawsuits to get federal lands back for Utah. Would you participate in that? What do you anticipate the cost of that would be?
Well, I noticed that the Commission for the Stewardship of Public Lands last week got this study from legal and constitutional scholars that said there are very good causes of action to help the western states get the lands back. And I'm fully supportive of that. As I've traveled the states, I see there's really a tale of 2 Utahs. There's the Utah along the Wasatch Front, where business is booming, and frankly, it's booming so much, I think we have a workforce labor shortage. And then there's the tale of rural Utah, where the public lands are tied up under onerous federal control to such an extent that counties like Garfield County have declared a state of emergency because there's no jobs, and they're exporting. Their biggest export is their children that have to leave to find jobs. And so I fully support Utah taking aggressive steps to get ownership and stewardship over our public lands. And I think the lawsuits that were outlined in last week's commission meeting are something the state should move forward on. When I heard the report of that meeting, you asked how much you think it would cost. What I heard was $14 million. And that's a big price tag, but it feels to me like a small price tag for liberty and sovereignty for Utah. And it's a price tag that I think other Western states should participate in, because we'll be fighting a fight not just for Utah public lands, but for public lands in the West. Okay.
Talking of rural Utah, there's been a lot of news on San Juan County and the issues with Commissioner Phil Lyman. How much have you been following that, and what's your take on that?
I followed it a little bit. From my understanding is he stayed on county roads that were open. I wasn't there, and I haven't followed the court proceedings, but to me, it's another example of public lands under federal management where the health of the land is worse, Utahns' access to the lands is worse, and the lands aren't as productive as they could and should be under state stewardship and local management.
Okay. Here's one. Do you ride UTA?
I ride it on occasion. Overstock is building a new corporate campus in Midvale, one of the main factors for the 19-acre plot of land that we picked to purchase was that the front door to our building will be 50 yards from the Bingham Junction tracks line. So I'm a big fan of public transportation. We're trying to encourage our employees at Overstock to use it and use it more, and building a campus right next to the tracks line is part of that.
What improvements would you like to see in UTA?
Well, first off, I think UTA has a public trust issue. And I think that there are a lot of good employees and good members of the board of directors at the UTA that are working to make the UTA better and to solve the public trust issue. But I think that these trip after trip that kind of come up after the fact that we learn about them and after the Prop 1 election are problematic. One of the changes that I've proposed and would like to see is shrinking the board from 15 to something smaller and more workable, 8 or 9. And then rather than have them all be political appointees appointed by political insiders, that we should make the UTA accountable to taxpayers and have those board positions be elected.
Okay. What is the most formative book of your youth or college that made you who you are today?
Well, that's a great question. I'm gonna have to scratch my head because I'm a big reader. I think I'm very religious, so the Book of Mormon and the Bible were certainly part of that. But a book that I read when I was in law school by Justice Bork, and its name is escaping me. The Tempting of America was a book that I really liked, and when I clerked for Justice Russin on the Utah Supreme Court, I recommended it to him, and he had all of his future clerks read it, and it really talks about the 3 branches of government and how they are supposed to work versus how they've come to work in what was then the late 20th and now the early 21st century. I think the executive branch has gotten much too large and does too much legislating. I think the judicial branch has become too activist, and rather than interpreting the law, often as making the law. But Judge Bork's book was very influential.
I'm glad you brought up your clerking experience. What about that experience was most eye-opening to you, in that you had an idea about certain ways the laws work, but then that experience taught you something else?
I guess one thing I was impressed with was how thoughtful each of the Utah Supreme Court justices were in considering the cases that they took under advisement, and were trying to interpret law rather than make new law. I guess the other thing, to answer your question, what was I surprised about? The cases that were briefed by lawyers were always excellently done, and I think we've got a good bar in Utah that does that well. But there were a number of handwritten appeals that I reviewed from people in prison. There is a need to make sure that those who can't afford counsel get it, particularly in the criminal system. And I remember researching awfully hard on those cases because some of the handwritten prisoner appeals weren't nearly as well researched, and the judges always wanted to make sure that justice was done for them too.
Okay. Are you self-financing your campaign?
I have put money into it. I'm accepting donations, so it's not entirely self-financed. So that's how that works.
Okay. Let me ask you about the USBE member selection process. What fixes would you like to see with that, if any?
Meaning the Utah State Board of Education?
Yes.
I think that those ought to be partisan elections. The way it's set up now, I think that there is too much control in the executive branch with the governor picking two folks to run for the spot. I also think that those are very important positions that voters need to know more about. There are only 15 of them. Their areas are about twice as large as a state senate seat, and yet they have a very difficult time raising money and disseminating information. And I think if those elections were partisan, the party would be able to help them disseminate information. They would have, I think, an easier time fundraising so that information could be disseminated to the voters. Very few people, I think, in Utah know who their representative is on the State Board of Education. And I think that's a problem because education is the thing that comes in closest to our homes as our children are affected by it every day.
Utah has a fairly low unemployment rate. What would you do to at least maintain that or make it even better?
Great question. So I think we have a low unemployment rate in large part because we've got businesses and entrepreneurs that are building great businesses here. And I don't think for a minute that government really does much to create jobs. I think it's businesses that work to create jobs. I think government has to provide a level playing field and a relatively low regulation, fertile soil for business, but it's business that creates jobs. I think that we should be focusing more on Utah, not on just creating jobs, but on creating careers. When I look at Overstock, we have a lot of entry-level jobs, people who come to work at our warehouse and pick, pack, and ship boxes, or that start out in customer care, answering the phone from our customers. But our goal with those employees is to take what I would call those entry-level jobs and turn them into careers. Help them learn marketing skills or accounting skills or merchandising skills so they can grow into jobs that are more like careers. I think we can do a better job of that at the secondary education level, where we're helping our junior high school and high school students figure out what career options they have that may include going to a university, but may include going to a trade tech or some of the union training centers. When I talk to manufacturers in Utah, they have a hard time finding machinists and injection molding professionals that our trade techs do such a good job of educating. And when people graduated with machinists, they don't just graduate with a job, they graduate with a career. When I graduated from college, I graduated with a degree in Japanese. I'm the ultimate humanities major. I don't think that necessarily prepared me for a career. I think we can do a better job by getting the student to counselor ratio in our high schools closer to the norm of 250 to 1 rather than the 350 or 400 to 1 that it is in many schools, to get our students figuring out what careers they can grow into.
Okay. One of the big issues that's going to be come up in this coming session is medical marijuana. What's your stance on medical marijuana?
When I think of legalized marijuana, I think of kind of three different categories. One you might call the Colorado category, where anything goes, total legalization of marijuana. I'm opposed to that. Then there's a medical marijuana that I would call a California style medical marijuana, which is really just a ruse for legal marijuana. You go to Dr. Bob Marley, he writes you a prescription for a headache, and it's filled at Jim's Maui Wowie pharmaceutical shop. I'm opposed to that. But medical marijuana, that is for specific ailments, that's prescribed by a licensed doctor, where the marijuana is pharmaceutical grade and not grown in someone's basement under a heat lamp. I think in that limited scope, that it makes sense to give it a try. And I'd love to see it pass, and perhaps with a sunset provision of 5 or 10 years out, so that we can see if it works, and if it doesn't work, it will go away. And if it works, we can renew it. And if it's somewhere in between working and not working, we can tweak it. But I think that there's a legitimate place as a medicine, but as a controlled medicine for medical marijuana.
Thank you. The president recently attended a climate change summit in Paris, and 200 countries made voluntary agreements to help reduce carbon emissions and try to help, reduce the pollution on Earth. What do you see as the future as far as where our energy plan is going to be going?
Well, Utah is energy rich, and we have a lot of energy that I think we need to be able to use and capitalize on. I'm kind of an all of the above energy person. I think as technologies advance and solar becomes and wind become more affordable, that's great. But I also know that we have some of the cleanest coal in the entire world here in Utah. And the federal government is locking that up as quickly as they can. And I think that's a mistake. I think we have to find a way to allow Utahns to extract that coal, and whether we burn it here in Utah or whether we ship it to China, where they're burning dirty coal and polluting the global atmosphere, either one works for me. But I think we need to do that. I also think we need to start using cleaner gasoline in Utah. We have an inversion problem that will exist forever because of geography, but we need to be doing a better job of not pumping as much gunk out of our tailpipes into the air. So I'm a big proponent of getting to Tier 3 fuels as quickly as we can.
Okay. We're almost at 4, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up with a couple rapid fires. What is something that you see other governors doing in other states that you wish we were doing in Utah?
I like what's been done in Arizona and Nevada with education savings accounts, which lets control and personalize education for their children better. I think that's something that Utah should consider.
What would you consider your number one priority as governor when you're coming in?
Well, as I've traveled the state, whether it's rural Utah or along the Wasatch Front, everyone's concerned about education. And I think if we nibble around the edges in trying to fix education, we're going to have the same old people looking at the same problems and getting roughly the same solutions. I think we need to make some transformative changes to improve education, and education will be my number one priority.
I know you're going to go through the caucus system, but are you just open to the idea of signatures, or are you going to do the Mike Lee route and just go ahead and do both?
Haven't decided. I think the plan has always been to do both, but I still think between today on the 14th of December and where we are on January 4th, there's some learning to be had with what the party does, with what the state Supreme Court does. So it's hard to say today.
Okay. This was Jonathan Johnson on today's Smart Questions Club. Thank you for your time.
John, thanks for having me on.
All right.